Thanks for checking out Scotty's Hobbies. Today I'm going to give you some tips and hints on what we need to do when you get a code for P0128 on your vehicle. This is going to be on a Chevy HHR, but it'll be the same for most and every darn near almost all vehicles out there. P0128 is coolant temperature below threshold. So pretty much means that in the allotted time or the allowed time for the vehicle to reach normal operating temperature, the vehicle did not do so. So if you're stuck around like a quarter or a third on your temperature gauge, that will probably send a code eventually and give you a coolant temp below threshold code. This is what I do when I get this code. Sometimes this is not the fix, such as one time I had a Honda Civic come in. We did the same thing we're doing in this video, and it ended up being the computer needed to be reprogrammed. It missed a update or it missed a recall like 15 years ago, and that ended up fixing that problem. But for the P0128 on most cars, I always recommend replacing the T-stat, the thermostat, and the coolant temperature sensor. If you have two coolant temperature sensors on here, one for the fan and one for the dash or the gauge, you might as well replace both while you're here because you're going to have the cooling system drained to get this done. So again, P0128, drain the coolant. Make sure you're cool enough, the coolant's cool enough to open it up. You don't want any hot coolant blasting up in your face and getting some second degree burns from all this stuff, or first degree, whatever it is. Correct me below, please. So make sure there's no pressure in the cooling system, drain the cooling system, replace the thermostat, replace the coolant temp sensor, and that usually fixes this issue. If you have a gauge that is stuck on your dash, so if it never moves around, and you have this code, you might have two different problems. You could also have a circuit problem, and let's hope you don't have that issue. So if it ends up being a circuit problem, somebody needs to check and see if you have continuity or voltage going to and from the sensor. But first off, I always recommend replacing the thermostat and the sensor, and I'd say 90% of the time that fixes the P0128 code. So here we are in the garage with the HHR. This vehicle has the P0128. This is the old thermostat and gasket that's obviously taken out, removed. I'm matching everything up before I reinstall everything. I like to make sure everything is the same. I hate to get halfway into it and be like, oh my gosh, this isn't the right part. So I like to set them side by side, make sure everything looks all legit. The new sensor, new T-stat, everything all right here. You can see I'm going to go ahead and install all of these parts, or both these parts, and after I do so, I'm going to clear the check engine light. This vehicle is actually from about 2 weeks ago, or this video I should say is from about 2 weeks ago. I spoke to the customer yesterday and she said she's driven it to work the last 2 weeks and she has not had the code come back on. Prior to that, I cleared the code for her and she drove it maybe 3 days, I think it was, and that code came back on for her. So looks like this problem is solved on this HHR, and this works for a ton of vehicles like we said. Here is the HHR's thermostat and the coolant temp sensor. Usually the coolant temp sensor for the computer or the dash will be near the thermostat housing. If you have two sensors like I talked about earlier in the video, you'll have one for the fans and another sensor for the computer or the dash. That's mainly on the older vehicles, say like 2005 and older, you might find that issue. And if that does apply to your vehicle, comment below and let me know. And also, if this video does help you out, let me know below the year, the make, model, everything. Let me know if this video helps you out. I really like to hear about that stuff. So P0128, replace the thermostat, replace the coolant temp sensor, obviously new coolant, don't ever use old stuff, and use your factory recommended coolant as well. I usually recommend getting the coolant that is pre-diluted. So when you buy 1 gallon, you're going to dilute it. So you'll buy 1 gallon and then dilute it with preferably distilled water, but it makes it a lot cheaper for you still, instead of buying 2 gallons of 50-50. This one took a little bit more than a gallon, I believe. When you install the new thermostat, make sure you clean up the gasket area. You don't want to have any of the old gasket left behind and left burrs or some high spots that won't get you a good seal, and you end up with a little pee leak later, and you have to take everything back apart, drain the cooling system and do all that. So make sure the seat for the thermostat gasket is in the proper direction. Also, if your thermostat has a weep hole or a little hole in it at all where water could go through, that always needs to be at the highest point. of the position of the thermostat. That'll allow air to flow through and purge itself out later on. So if you have any vehicle that has one of those T-stats that have a hole in it, make sure that is pointing up, always pointing up in the highest point of the thermostat housing. But that's pretty much it. This should be your fix. If it's not, comment below. If it is, comment below. Make sure you check out my video library for other helpful videos and a ton of emissions component locations. Thanks for checking out Scotty's Hobbies, and I will see you on the next hopefully helpful video.